Welcome to the Reset Talk Show. I am your host, Andre Clay. And on tonight's show, we have Trump plans to destroy the Department of Education. Should black people care if he does? Again, Trump plans to destroy the Department of Education. Should black people care if he does? Tonight's show will be a show where you'll be able to comment. Please feel free to chime in. Tonight's show will be simulcast broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. Thank you for tuning in. And with that, let us begin. It's now been about 3 weeks since Trump beat Harris in the general election and be reelected to become the 47th president of these United States of America. Democrats have since been trying to cope with the agony of defeat, while the Republicans are basking in the rays of victory, leaving the rest of American citizens left to exist in news media limbo until January 20th, 2025. But Trump wasted no time, as promised, to get things together for his return to office. Cabinet picks are the latest news, as appointment after appointment seems unqualified to fill these important positions. Controversies surrounding some of them and their chances of congressional approval also weigh in, while Trump's use of the recess appointment clause hangs over their heads. But tonight, we will be discussing one of the most unusual appointments, Ms. Linda McMahon, of WWE fame as Secretary of Education, and how Trump plans to carry out Project 2025's plan to destroy the Department of Education, and if Black America needs to be concerned about this upcoming change to our public school system. And to begin tonight's show, I came across this article here from Fox News, in which GOP Senator debuts bill to abolish Department of Education following Trump campaign promise. A Republican senator introduced a measure to do away with the Department of Education on Thursday after President-elect Trump suggested doing so on the 2024 campaign trail. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota debuted the Returning Education to Our States Act in the Senate, which would abolish the Department of Education and charge various other departments with certain responsibilities and programs that are currently administered by it. During his presidential campaign, Trump said, "One thing I'll be doing very early in the administration is closing up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and sending all education and education work it needs back to the states." The Federal Department of Education has never educated a single student, and it's long past time to end this bureaucratic department that causes more harm than good, Round said in a statement provided to Fox News Digital. We all know local control is best when it comes to education. Everyone raised in South Dakota can think of a teacher who played a big part in their educational journey. Local school boards and state departments of education know best what their students need, not unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. For years, I've worked towards removing the Federal Department of Education. I'm pleased that President-elect Trump shares this vision, and I'm excited to work with him and Republican majorities in the Senate and House to make this a reality. This legislation is a roadmap to eliminating the Federal Department of Education by practically rehoming these federal programs in the departments where they belong, which will be critical as we move into next year, he continued. In the senator's plan, a number of Native American education programs will be redirected to the Department of Interior. Loan and grant programs would become the responsibility of the Department of Treasury. Disability programs would be overseen by the Department of Health and Human Services. Career programs would move to the Department of Labor, and the State Department would become responsible for the Fulbright Hays program, which supports research and training efforts overseas. The new bill comes after Trump revealed he plans to tap Linda McMahon, former CEO of the World Wrestling Entertainment, to lead the Department of Education earlier this week. Now, upon reading this article, I started to understand, okay, they plan to redirect some of the services that were in the Department of Education, but there was one responsibility that I did not see mentioned, and it made me ask, well, what will happen to the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, otherwise known as the OCR? Now, some may ask, well, what is the OCR? And more specifically, what is the United States Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, and what do they do? The U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, OCR, is a federal agency with the responsibility of ensuring equal access to education through the enforcement of civil rights. Several federal agencies have offices for civil rights attached to them, but the OCR in the Department of Education is specifically responsible for enforcing numerous federal civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination in programs or activities that receive federal financial assistance from the Department of Education. This includes all public education institutions, for example, all state education agencies, elementary and secondary school systems, colleges and universities, vocational schools and proprietary schools, as well as state vocational rehabilitation agencies, libraries, and museums that receive U.S. Department of Education funds. The federal laws that the OCR enforces prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, or age. The agency is specifically responsible for enforcing two laws that prohibit discrimination based on disability in public education, as well as the other entities mentioned in the previous paragraph. These two laws are the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and the Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. If an individual believes that they have been discriminated against on the basis of disability, they can contact OCR for assistance. OCR accepts complaints from individuals who believe they have been discriminated against and provides technical assistance to individuals or institutions seeking information. A complaint can also be filed by another person or institution on behalf of an individual who believes that they have been discriminated against. The agency can be contacted through telephone, electronic means, email, or in person. After receiving a complaint, OCR will investigate and attempt to resolve it. This may include in-depth investigation and negotiation with, for example, a public school, and typically results in voluntary compliance agreements between the institution and the Office of Civil Rights. If the complaint is not resolved to the individual's satisfaction through this administrative process, they can always pursue a legal complaint. In some cases, if the Office of Civil Rights does not resolve the issue, the agency may request that the U.S. Department of Justice file a lawsuit. Now, when was the Department of Education established? Because there are some out there who insist that, well, it's just not necessary because we've always had public schools. And it's true. Ever since the 1800s, we've always had public schools. But when it comes down to when it was established, the United States Department of Education was officially established on October 17th in 1979, when President Jimmy Carter signed the Department of Education Organization Act into law. It began operations on May 4, 1980, following the division of the former Department of Health, Education, and Welfare into two separate entities, the Department of Education and then the Department of Health and Human Services. The department's origins trace back to an earlier Department of Education created in 1867, which was later downgraded to an office. Now, what were the main reasons behind the creation of the Department of Education in 1980? Well, the Department of Education was created in 1980 to address several key objectives. One, strengthening federal commitment. It aimed to ensure equal educational opportunities for all individuals. Number two, supplementing state efforts. The department was redesigned to complement state and local efforts to improve education quality. Three, public involvement. Encouraging increased public, parental, and student involvement in federal educational programs was a priority. Number four, improving coordination and efficiency. It sought to better coordinate federal education programs and enhance the management of federal educational activities. Number five, accountability. Increasing accountability of federal education programs to the President, Congress, and the public was also a critical reason for its establishment. Now, why is that important? Why was it important that Jimmy Carter in 1980 decided that we needed to consolidate all of these responsibilities that had been scattered, that had been divided out amongst other bureaucracies into one agency? Well, the answer may have a more historical answer to it, if you will. Are Trump and the Republicans trying to take our public school system back to Jim Crow? Now, some may feel this is loaded. Some may feel this is an unfair question to ask, but given the protections, given some of the remedy that the Department of Education sought to try to have for those black students in particular who were being racially profiled against, having schools be segregated against. These are some of the remedies that the Department of Education sought to resolve. But education for black Americans under Jim Crow, which was the era between that 1867 establishment of public education and then the civil rights bills in the 1960s. Education for black Americans under Jim Crow laws was inferior to that of white Americans in many ways. Now, one of the ways was segregation. Black and white children were required to attend separate schools. Funding. Black schools received less state funding than white schools. Supplies. Black schools were often dilapidated and lacked basic supplies like books, pencils, and desks. This was all prior to the Civil Rights Amendment. Teachers. Black teachers were often untrained and paid less than white teachers. Class size. Black schools were often overcrowded. Enrollment. Only about 20% of black children were enrolled in school compared to 60% of white children. Graduation. In 1950, only 1 in 10 black adults graduated from high school compared to 4 in 10 white adults. Schooling years. Black adults in Mississippi, for instance, and Georgia and other southern states averaged only about 5 years of schooling. And then when I took a look at the American University School of Education in Washington, D.C., with a brief history of classroom segregation, I learned that as early as the 1930s, members of the NAACP were looking for strategies to desegregate schools through lawsuits targeting the legal doctrine of separate but equal. However, not until the Brown v. Board of Education in 1954 did the U.S. Supreme Court unanimously outlaw state-sanctioned school segregation, ruling it unconstitutional. From their inception, schools serving students of color received significantly less funding than schools serving white students and faced overcrowding, inadequate supplies, and insufficiently paid teachers. Such disparities resulted in gaps in the educational opportunities available to black and white communities. In 1950, only 1 in 10 black adults graduated from high school compared to 4 in 10 white adults. Especially hard hit were people living in states with the history of Jim Crow, as mentioned before, in Mississippi, Georgia, and other states, having an average of only about 5 years of schooling. Much of segregation, whether in schools or neighborhoods, trace back to a history of discriminatory policies. For example, redlining, the practice of denying loans to people of color trying to purchase homes in predominantly white neighborhoods, prevented many families of color from moving into areas with well-funded schools. And so what did that leave? Well, in the black neighborhoods, because I remember my parents talking to me about this as a child, their schools were called Jim Crow schools. And in those schools, which taught their students only those skills needed for agricultural work and domestic service, which fit the needs of the white economy and society. That's what was taught in those Jim Crow schools for the most part. Any desire to learn any type of technology or anything outside of agriculture and domestic work was often discouraged to black students from their teachers. Booker T. Washington reflected the reality of the situation facing Southern blacks when he said in 1915 that white men will vote funds for Negro education just in proportion to their belief in the value of that education. Again, white men will vote funds for Negro education just in proportion to their belief in the value of that education. The only value to a white landowner in educating black children lay in their ability to pick cotton or wash laundry. Any education beyond the rudiments of literacy and figuring would not only be wasted on them, but it might encourage them to seek higher education, which would make them unfit for working on white-owned farms and in white homes. Knowledge makes a black man unfit to be a slave. It is what it is. But with this upcoming change to the way public schools are going to be managed by our federal government, if at all, because it does look like it's going to be reverting back to states' rights. And history has shown us that states' rights doesn't fare well for black Americans. In most cases, states' education, the schools, are funded through property taxes. And in most cases, whites own more homes, own more real estate than black folks, who tend to rent a lot, especially in big cities, which is why the federal government came in to give the shortfall, financial shortfall, to those schools who were not receiving the same kind of funding as white schools were because of those situations in different states. With the elimination of the Department of Education, how will discrimination be addressed? There's no word, again, about how any civil rights issues will be addressed with the upcoming administration. Should black America be concerned? Well, I would say yes. I think all of America should be concerned. Will the responsibilities that the current Department of Education take on truly be handled better with other bureaucracies, with other departments in our government? Maybe. It's yet to be seen. But I think it's too early for anyone to defend what Trump is doing yet, especially given some of the faces, some of the names that we see with some of the appointees that he is given. Most not qualified for the positions, having no history of having any expertise or knowledge about any of the positions that they've been appointed to. But we as an American people, we must stay mindful. And those of you who have children, a change is coming. A change is coming to the way the system will be educating your child. We've already seen in various other states how CRT is being attacked, which in K through 12 is not, it doesn't even exist. However, classes that teach the black side of our American history are often pushed to the side or eliminated. Books are being eliminated so that our students won't learn the truth about the struggle in America for black Americans to gain equality and full citizenship and recognition in this land. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for chiming in. I want to thank you all for viewing tonight's show. And I want you to think about whether or not the change that's coming to the Department of Education affects your family. Does this affect your life? If any of you would like to chime in or leave a comment later, please feel free. I want to thank you all for tuning in. And with that being said, good night.